Listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Paul Denning, and for the next hour I'll be reading from current issues of the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is from Tuesday, January 27th. Attic fire erupt. Falls firefighters investigating Monday afternoon blaze on 17th Street. Niagara Falls firefighters spent much of Monday afternoon on the scene of a house fire on 17th Street. Niagara Falls firefighters responded to the scene in the 600 block of 17th Street around 3:10 p.m. for reports of a possible structure fire after a 911 caller reported seeing smoke coming from the building. The single occupant of the third floor apartment was able to evacuate safely. The first and second floor apartments were reportedly empty. First arriving firefighters confirmed a working fire. As the smoke thickened, firefighters made entry into the apartment building and began searching for the fire. Firefighters were initially unable to locate the fire and believed the fire was in the wall. As firefighters were about to breach a wall, fire conditions in the eaves and attic area changed rapidly, and all firefighters were evacuated from the building and began defensive operations. Using the aerial master stream and several hand lines, firefighters were able to distinguish the fire. Firefighters remained on scene into the night Monday. The cause of the fire remains under investigation. The next article was written by Jeff Kelly, Investigative Post. Crime lab case heads back to court. Arguments on unsealing of depositions and other evidence to be heard. In a lawsuit, two former employees of the Niagara County Forensics Lab have accused a former director of mismanagement and misconduct that legal experts say could compromise criminal convictions that relied on the lab's analysis. The plaintiffs, the father and daughter, claim Corey Ort-Gawrays, the sister of State Senate Minority Leader Robert Ort, harassed and defamed them over a 2-year period, compelling one to quit and the other to retire early. The father, Thomas DeFonso, claims Ort-Gawrays turned on him after she pushed him to certify a lab chemist to do forensic drug analysis for criminal cases. DeFonso refused because he believed the chemist lacked sufficient training at the time. She was cleared to do the work anyway, according to DeFonso. He said he alerted his superiors in the sheriff's office to the analyst's certification issue as early as March 2020, but nothing was done. That revelation, if true, could compromise hundreds, perhaps thousands of local drug cases, according to legal experts. Quotes, "This could certainly affect the criminal convictions of a large number of defendants, especially those who went to trial," Anthony O'Rourke, a University of Buffalo law professor who specializes in criminal procedure, told Investigative Post. Ort-Gawrays is also accused of engaging in sexual relationships with one or more law enforcement officers who brought casework to the lab. as well as an Erie County forensics expert, according to depositions taken for the lawsuit. DeFonso claims Ort Garies ordered him to expedite work for those officers. Attorneys for the defendants, Ort Garies, Niagara County, and the Niagara County Sheriff's Office, have denied any wrongdoing in inappropriate relationships. One judge has already recused himself from hearing the case based on the allegations made in the lawsuit and depositions. The plaintiff's attorney, Kristen Civiletto, says in court papers that her client's allegations are supported by depositions taken as part of the lawsuit and by audio recordings of meetings between lab employees and their superiors in the sheriff's office. The plaintiffs also point to text messages between Ort Garies and lab employees in which the lab director said she would, quotes, make sure DeFonso gets forced into retirement, and describes her brother's political clout and friendship with Niagara County Sheriff Michael Filicetti. Much of that material has been under seal, labeled attorney's eyes only, a designation the plaintiffs are challenging in court this month, citing the highest considerations of public interest in the integrity of the lab work. Plaintiffs contend that they were asked to rush cases for officers with whom defendant Ort Garies was having a sexual relationship, Civiletto wrote in a brief supporting the declassification of evidence in the case. Sheriff Filicetti admitted in his deposition that the laboratory has been compromised, Civiletto continued. That fact alone is the public's business. None of this information can be kept confidential. State Supreme Court Justice Mario Jacoby in October recused himself from hearing the case. He cited the plaintiff's allegation that Ort Garies engaged in an interpersonal relationship of a non-forensic nature with officers submitting evidence. He said some of those officers have appeared and likely would continue to appear to give testimony in his courtroom. The judge also noted that Ort Garies is alleged to have had an intimate relationship with a member of Erie County's crime lab, with whom Jacoby had a professional relationship before becoming a judge, when he was an Erie County prosecutor. Ort Garies and defense counsel have denied any impropriety. The lawsuit is now before State Supreme Court Justice Frank Sedita, a former Erie County District Attorney. Sedita is slated to hear arguments today about unsealing the depositions and other evidence that so far have been kept from public view. Civiletto said Sedita has indicated he will not consider recusing himself on the same grounds as Jacoby. The plaintiffs previously asked that the case be moved to a court outside Niagara in Erie counties. That request was denied. Sedita will consider whether Civiletto can depose Ort Garies' brother, the state senator, whose political protection she invoked during her tenure as lab director. Civiletto subpoenaed Ort in September. The defendant's attorneys last month moved to quash the subpoena. Ort, the state senator, refused an interview request. We maintain that the Senate's office has no involvement in this matter. Excuse me. And have no further comment, a spokesperson from court's office told Investigative Post in an email. Harvey Sanders, Ort Galritz's attorney, told Investigative Post his client was, quotes, not interested in an interview and would have no comment beyond the arguments presented in court papers. Attorneys representing Niagara County and Sheriff Filicetti, also defendants in the lawsuit, said their clients, quotes, do not agree to an interview and generally do not comment on the specifics of active litigation. Quotes, I think we will prevail in this case based on the facts that will become apparent, Filicetti told Investigative Post. And I'll leave it at that. For more of this story, visit investigativepost.org. Next article is a commentary by Mark Scheer. Pondering the city's age-old snow plowing questions. We just had a pretty significant winter storm event, which means it's once again time for public officials to roll out one of the city's oldest and most cherished chestnuts, the oft-repeated claim that snow plowing would go better if residents just learned to cooperate and get their cars out of the way. Please, enough already. Yes, there are certainly times when residents fail to adhere to overnight parking rules or don't move their cars to places where they aren't in the way of the plows. And yes, at times, that does cause unneeded headaches for city plow drivers in some areas. But let's be clear, it's not happening all over the city after every snowstorm. There's a deeper problem here, as deep as the snow covering the lawn after a good old-fashioned winter dumping. Please understand, I know this is at times a daunting, nearly impossible task. Snow events around here can be never-ending sieges in terms of battling back against Mother Nature's impact on area roadways. I'm not saying any of this to knock the drivers who are forced to work at all hours of the day and night in crummy weather just to keep up. I'm pretty sure we're not paying them enough, not paying enough to attract more workers like them. I'm not the mayor, the city administrator, a council member, or the director of DPW. I don't have all the answers. I did read, once again, dozens of Facebook comments from fellow residents who weren't happy, mostly about the condition of the side streets over the weekend. Each year, the snowfall season feels like watching the movie Groundhog Day, only Bill Murray isn't around to make any of it funny. I got home around 5 p.m. Monday and found 71st Street still covered with a pretty thick layer of snow. I went out for a bit, only to return at around 6 p.m. to find a plow truck clearing my street. I didn't shout hooray, even though I felt the need. Up until that point, I did what I've always done since we moved into our house in 2005. I shoveled my sidewalks, my driveway, and then out into the road to ensure I could have a running start as I made a mad dash in my car down the short end of my street. It's like playing a familiar game by now where, because plowing my street seems to always be delayed, I make a run in the family vehicle as fast as I can through the snow so I can get to the nearest, quotes, secondary and, quotes, main roads, which, as DPW directors long since passed, have consistently advised me get plowed first. Living where I live puts me and others on the short end of the route schedule. We, learn to live with it. But why? I have a dream where part of our local economy, here in the Falls and in neighboring Buffalo, revolves around something I think we should be excellent at doing, and that's removing snow from public spaces, roads included. We most certainly have the experience and all the experimental material we need each winter. I like to imagine our industrial development and economic gurus pitching tax breaks and other incentives to all manner of windshield wiper makers, or maybe companies that produce those skid steers often used to remove snow from sidewalks. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Even better, what if we attempted to locate any geniuses, are there any out there interested in such things, who are right now developing fancy gizmos or whatnots designed to melt or blast away white stuff from wherever it falls? Perhaps we could convene the world's greatest snowplowing minds right here to reinforce what we're doing well or assist us in addressing our deficiencies. Okay, so all of that probably isn't necessary. What's needed, I think, is much simpler. It's called priorities. Make snowplowing one and invest in it. Respond to residents' concerns. Don't ignore them. Value the employees who drive the plows the way the city values other departments, public safety included. Instead, it always seems like the city is continually stuck in the same place, like a wayward vehicle stranded in a drift. Is it just us, the same city residents, complaining too much? Maybe that's part of it, but after years of disappointment and failure, should they be blamed for wanting better, for at least having their streets cleared more frequently? Snow plowing is and has been an issue for city residents for decades. Rest assured, it's not all because some of them keep parking in the wrong places. Next article was written by Robert Creenan from the Niagara Gazette. County planners support DeGraff property renovations. Work not planned to start until 2027, according to People Inc. While approvals are coming for People Inc.'s new senior apartment complex in North Tonawanda, do not expect it to open for residents in the near future. The disused 5-story, 85,000 square foot bed tower within the DeGraff Medical Park at 445 and 452 Tremont Street is being eyed for the project. Brian Smith, People Inc.'s Vice President of Real Estate, said renovations aren't planned to begin until at least 2027. The Buffalo-based nonprofit, which announced the renovation plans this past December in partnership with the City of North Tonawanda, plans on applying for state and federal housing tax credits later this year to help fund the project. It will not hear until next year whether the credits are awarded. Quotes, in a best case scenario, we would love to get started on this in 2027, but some other things have to fall into place in order for that to happen, Smith said. In that best case scenario, it would be ready for the public by 2029. The tower, Originally built in 1962 and vacant since Kaleida Health ended inpatient services there in 2019, will be renovated to hold 70 apartments for eligible seniors age 55 and older. That will be made of 62 one-bedroom units and 8 two-bedroom units, with rent determined based on the individual's annual income, along with an employee training center and day habilitation program for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Corey Auerbach, a lawyer from Barclay Damon representing People Inc., said he had toured the tower 2 years ago with Kaleida Health representatives looking for redevelopment opportunities. Quotes, "It's a much needed and desirable housing opportunity for the city that recently went through a new comprehensive plan process," Auerbach said. A parking lot across Tremont Street would serve as the main parking area, with the sidewalks crossing the street to be adequately striped. A one-story building next to the tower would be demolished to make way for some needed infrastructure, like additional handicap parking and a patio structure. Given its location next to DeGraff, Auerbach said they would coordinate with the hospital on access should they need services, possibly pedestrian access rather than direct access. Excuse me. It's sort of an amenity for the folks that are living there, Auerbach said. DeGraff Hospital, part of the Kaleida healthcare system, still owns the 1.75-acre property People Inc. wants, which cannot go ahead with the full purchase until it gets approvals from the North Tonawanda Planning and Zoning Boards. The Niagara County Planning Board gave its support for this project at its meeting on Monday. People Inc. manages more than 30 apartment complexes across western New York, housing more than 1,300 residents. They include the Nelson Hopkins Apartments and Pine Apartments in Lockport and the Grant Street School Apartments in North Tonawanda. The initial announcement back in December said that People Inc. would hold a public meeting with area residents to provide more details about this project. Smith said they still intend to do that, though that has not been scheduled yet. Next article is from the Associated Press. Trump threatens to hike tariffs on South Korean goods. Washington. President Donald Trump said Monday he is increasing tariffs on South Korean goods because the country's National Assembly has yet to approve the trade framework announced last year. Trump said on social media that import taxes would be raised on autos, lumber, and pharmaceutical drugs from South Korea, with the rate on other goods going from 15% to 25%. The U.S. president previously imposed the tariffs by declaring an economic emergency and bypassing Congress. Excuse me. While South Korea needed legislative approval for the framework announced in July and affirmed during Trump's October visit to the country. Quotes, "Our trade deals are very important to America. In each of these deals, we've acted swiftly to reduce our tariffs in line with the transaction agreed to," Trump said. "We, of course, expect our trading partners to do the same." The threat was a reminder that the tariff drama unleashed last year by Trump is likely to be repeated again and again this year. The global economy and U.S. voters might find the world's trade structure constantly being subject to disruption and new negotiations, as Trump has already sought to levy tariffs in order to bend other nations to his will. Trump has in the past tied his tariffs to commitments by South Korea to invest $350 billion in the U.S. economy over several years, including efforts to revitalize American shipyards. But the Trump administration's relations with South Korea have at times been rocky, with the raid last year by immigration officials at a Hyundai manufacturing site in Georgia that caused 475 people to be detained. South Korea's presidential office responded in a statement that the U.S. hasn't officially informed it of the tariff hike plan. It said South Korean Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwon, who is currently visiting Canada, will soon travel to the U.S. for talks with Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. The statement said Kim Yong-byom, the presidential chief of staff for policy, will convene a meeting to discuss Trump's announcement. Monday's announcement of new tariffs fits a pattern in which Trump plans to continue to deploy tariffs, possibly to the detriment of relations with other countries. Just last week, the president threatened tariffs on 8 European nations unless the U.S. gained control of Greenland, only to pull back on his ultimatum after meetings at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Trump on Saturday said he would put a 100% tax on goods from Canada if it followed through with plans to bolster trade with China. Trump has bragged about his trade frameworks as drawing in new investments to the U.S., yet many of his heavily hyped deals have yet to be finalized. The European Parliament has yet to approve a trade deal pushed by Trump that would put a 15% tax on the majority of goods exported by the EU's 27 member states. The next article is also by the Associated Press. Republicans appeal GOP-controlled House district decision. Albany. Republicans on Monday appealed a judge's decision to throw out the lines of New York City's only GOP-controlled House seat, a case that could have national reverberations in the fight for control of Congress. The appeal came just days after a judge ruled U.S. Representative Nicole Maliotakis' Staten Island and Brooklyn district was drawn in a way that dilutes the power of its black and Hispanic voters. The judge ordered the state's independent redistricting commission to complete a new map by February 6th. The case was filed by an election law firm aligned with the Democratic Party. It came as part of a national gerrymandering fight that started after President Donald Trump pushed to craft new congressional districts in Republican-controlled states, such as Texas. Republicans filed appeals to both a mid-level appeals court and to the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals rejected congressional maps that had been seen as helping Democrats and directed a court-appointed expert to redraw districts. It then threw out those maps before the 2024 congressional elections. It was not immediately clear when the Court of Appeals would take up the most recent case. The state's current House districts were drawn by Democrats in the state legislature after they rejected a proposal for from the state's bipartisan redistricting commission. New York State is currently represented in the House by 19 Democrats and 7 Republicans. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Turning to local news, an article by Robert Creenan from the Niagara Gazette. North Tonawanda tables noise ordinance changes. City also creating new part-time HR position to deal with all such city issues. The North Tonawanda Common Council has tabled its revised noise ordinance to examine whether the proposed noise limits are too restrictive. Comments from residents during the January 20 meeting were about the usage of DBC levels to measure noise, as Mayor Austin Tylek said most municipalities do not include that in their ordinances. Compared to dBA noise levels, which measure sound as the human ear perceives it, DBC levels account for lower level frequencies that the human ear cannot pick up. We're talking with the expert, Les Bloomberg of Noise Pollution Clearinghouse, about the DBC levels and some other tweaks, Tylek said. Hopefully within the next month it will be passed. The proposed maximum decibel limits for 3 differently zoned areas of the city include residential or public space, 55 dBA and 65 dBc from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., 50 dBA and 55 dBc from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Commercial spaces, 60 dBA and 65 dBc from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., 55 dBA and 60 dBc from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Industrial spaces, 65 dBA and 70 dBc all day. Punishments for ordinance violations range from $250 to a motorcycle fine for a first-time violation to being deemed a public nuisance for 12 or more convictions within a year. The city's current ordinance dates back to 1978. The Common Council also approved the creation of a new part-time labor relations and human resources specialist position. It would act in a centralized role dealing with HR complaints, union grievances, contract negotiations, be a liaison between the mayor and council, and help the city government be more efficient. Quotes, as our city continues to grow and evolve, the increasing complexity of workforce management, compliance requirements, and employee support highlights the need for a centralized HR function to better serve both employees and the administration, wrote Tylek in a letter to the council about this position. Currently, all city departments deal with HR matters in their own separate ways or are outsourced to third-party companies. Tylek said as a result, they have noticed gaps in things like sexual harassment training or posting job requirements for employees. We just want to make sure we're doing everything the state and federal government is asking us to, Tylek said. The job listing for this role was posted on the city website on Monday, with applicants having to meet Niagara County Civil Service job specifications. In brief, dog beating case ends in probation. DeAndre Rogers, 31 of Buffalo, was sentenced Friday before State Supreme Court Justice Paul Wachtazik to 3 years of probation for severely injuring a 9-year-old Chihuahua. As a condition of his sentence, Rogers must perform 30 hours of community service and pay $5,908.49 in restitution to the SPCA serving Erie County. During the early morning of May 10, Rogers intentionally hit the dog while inside of a residence on the 200 block of Geary Street in the city of Buffalo. The 9-year-old female Chihuahua, named Bella, was taken to Blue Pearl Pet Hospital in the town of Cheektowaga, where she was hospitalized for skull fractures and other serious physical injuries. Bella was transferred to the custody of the SPCA serving Erie County for rehabilitation, then later adopted by a new owner. In November, Rogers pleaded guilty to 1 count of attempted aggravated cruelty to animals, Class A misdemeanor. A 15-year court order prohibiting Rogers from owning, harboring, or having custody or control of any animals was also issued. Furnace reminder offered to residents. With western New York communities experiencing an abundance of snowfall in recent days, and more on the way, NOCO is sharing a few winter weather reminders for homeowners. The first is to make sure your home's furnace vents are not blocked with snowdrifts. These vents are typically white PVC pipes located on the side of your house, which allow your furnace to properly exhaust. Blocked furnace vents can cause your furnace to shut down and allow carbon monoxide to build up inside of your home, said Kevin Williams, Executive Vice President of NOCO at Home. NOCO encourages homeowners to check furnace vents as well as dryer vents, heat pumps, and gas meters daily as snow continues to fall and as wind may blow more snow up against the house even after clearing. NOCO at Home provides thousands of homes across western New York with energy projects from heating, ventilating, and air conditioning to standby power, natural gas, electricity, and sustainable options like geothermal, solar, and insulation. For more details or to schedule service or a home energy assessment, call NOCO at 716-466-6626. The next article is written by Rick Pfeiffer of the Gazette. Falls Council will return to public work sessions. Postpones vote on hiring of PR firm. Without debate, the Niagara Falls City Council has enacted the first of what are expected to be multiple changes in how it conducts its legislative business. In a unanimous vote last week, the Council approved a resolution to reestablish its past practice of holding committee of the whole meetings prior to regular legislative sessions. Prior to the vote, the proposal had already gained the support of all the council members and Mayor Robert Restano. The resumption of Committee of the Whole sessions has been a pillar of newly elected Council Chair Brian Archie's initiatives to build ties among the council members and the Restano administration. Thank you all, Archie said after the vote, so we can now make this government more collaborative. Committee of the Whole meetings will allow all of the council members to meet together to discuss agenda items without violating the state's open meetings law. The first committee meeting is scheduled for February 11 between 4:45 and 5:45 p.m. in the City Council chambers. Robert's Rules of Order, which normally govern the conduct of council legislative sessions, will not be used during the committee meeting. While council members will be permitted to informally discuss agenda items, they will not be able to take any binding votes on those items or any potential new business that may be submitted for inclusion in a future proposed council agenda. Archie, Democrat, has said the return to committee of the whole meetings will, quotes, give the council, the administration, and department heads a chance to share information that will be beneficial to the council's understanding of agenda items. In the early 2000s, the committee work sessions were a regular part of the council's process, but for much of the last decade, the practice was discontinued. Archie said his understanding is that the mayor, the city administrator, and city department heads will all participate in the committee of the whole meetings. We've been having conversations, and my understanding in this is that this will be a collaborative process, Archie said. Communications will help improve understanding. The council also voted 4-1 to postpone consideration of a request from Restano to retain E3 Communications as a professional communications consultant for the city. The proposed contract calls for E3 to be paid $48,000 for a wide range of services. A memo to the council from Restano indicates that E3 would be the city's primary communications partner. It calls for the Buffalo-based firm to provide media relations and publicity management, police and public safety communications support, crisis communications and reputation management, strategic communications planning and issues management, community relations, coalition building, and grassroots outreach, state and local government affairs, and legislative tracking and media training for city officials. Councilmember David Zajac, Republican, pushed back on the proposal, noting that he had led a move to eliminate a $48,000 line in the city's 2026 budget that had previously been intended to hire a public information officer. Quotes, but that position wasn't filled for most of 2025, and then we were told it's for an executive assistant in 2026, Zajac said. We didn't have a PIO because the position wasn't filled for months, but information was still getting out there. Council member Vincent Cawley, Republican, said he was opposed to the contract unless E3 could come to the council with a presentation to show what they're going to do. Council member Bridget Miles, Democrat, said she wanted more information about the contract, but she believes the city needs a better social media presence. Member James Perry, Democrat, who voted against postponing a vote on the contract, said the city needs a PIO, quotes, but we couldn't hire a professional for what we wanted to pay. Restano said the contract would be funded through the city's tourism fund. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Turning to the opinion page, this is a guest view from CNHI News Service. 2 big lies need to be refuted. Whatever one might think of President Donald Trump, and however much his fans may be desperate to believe everything that issues from his mouth or those of his staff, 2 troubling lies keep springing up and need to be laid to rest. The first, and perhaps the most embarrassing, involves the assertion that the 2020 election was, quotes, stolen from Trump. This claim continues to make the rounds on the MAGA circuit, although every single Secretary of State, Election Board Secretary, and judge who handled the frivolous lawsuits have confirmed Joe Biden won fair and square. And many, if not most, of those who made public statements are Republicans, some of whom were bullied by Trump and others to lie. To their credit, it did not happen, except for in a couple of cases, which resulted in charges. Election tampering is a crime, and anyone who perpetuates it is pathetic and should be exposed. But prevarication about cheating that didn't occur is puerile and mean-spirited, a throwback to when we were in junior high school. It needs to stop, and candidates doing it should not be rewarded with votes. As far as state political candidates, with a few notable and discussing exceptions, most of them haven't continued blowing and going about the election being stolen. And even those who made the most noise in the past, like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is trying to influence the outcome of Oklahoma's gubernatorial election, know in their hearts it isn't true. They just say what they must to appease the base. But appeasing the base, either far left or far right, is just as pathetic as cheating the vote. This needs to stop, and any candidate who pushes the prevarication doesn't deserve our votes, and those already in state office should be kicked to the curb, especially those who don't actually live in the states they purportedly serve. The second big lie has been told at the local level, festering on Facebook timelines and elsewhere, but mainly on social media. It comes almost exclusively from those on the hard right, who insist that protesters deemed leftist are being paid for marching, toting signs, and shouting down policies and people they don't like. It's hard to understand why otherwise rational folks would make fools of themselves by making this claim, which is easily proved false, but they do it every day. Apparently, the folks peddling this particular fib can't seem to grasp the fact that those who are passionate enough about an issue don't have to be paid to protest. Journalists have repeatedly tried to find someone who will admit to accepting money to protest, even if they all only talk off the record. At least in this neck of the woods, not a single person seems to have benefited monetarily from exercising the First Amendment right to, quotes, peaceably assemble or to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Perhaps the frustration lies with the fact that people who support far-right issues are not willing to protest unless they are, in fact, compensated for doing so. And they can't understand why those on the left don't share their attitude. But then again, what about the January 6th insurgents? Were they paid by Trump or someone else for attacking the U.S. Capitol? One might argue they were indeed rewarded since they were pardoned for their sins by Trump. And of course, a number of them are now suing the government for having the temerity to charge them with crimes. People of goodwill who hold the First Amendment dear and who want free and fair elections should take it upon themselves to tamp down these lies whenever they hear or see them. The lies are a big reason why Americans are so divided, and it's on display for all the world to see. The next article is commentary by Matthew Masiello. He is a pediatrician and public health practitioner. He served as director of offices of health, promotion, and disease prevention at Winburn Research Institute, now Chan Soon Xiong Institute of Molecular Medicine at Winburn in Pennsylvania. Entitled Racism Continues in America. I have something in common with Tom Hanks, Moments of Ignorance. His quote, "What's the Tulsa Massacre?" I had never heard of this thing in 1921. Only 3 years before my dad was born, it made me angry. It made me mad. It made me mad that somebody somehow made an editorial process of what was appropriate for us to learn about our American history. It made me angry that it took me 54 years to find out. It's not right. It's not right. It's doing a disservice to all of America. During the 2023 celebration of Black History Month, celebrating pioneers in medicine and science, notable Black Americans and their achievements were displayed on our hospital's system-wide computer screensavers. 2 screenshots caught my attention during my self-guided learning. The first showed Henrietta Lacks, a Black woman, with the caption, "She contributed the cancer cells that are the source of the HeLa cell line, the immortalized human cell line." What was not mentioned was that she died from cervical cancer in 1951, and that Dr. George Gray of Johns Hopkins Hospital distributed lax tumor cells to doctors at Johns Hopkins. He never informed her or her family of his unethical research practices. Although Gay gave the cells to his colleagues at no cost, many biotech companies profited millions of dollars from using them. It took 50 years for Lack's family to receive compensation. The second screensaver displayed images of the Black Pittsburgh Ambulance Service. The caption read, "First emergency medical service in the United States, staffed by paramedics with medical training beyond first aid." However, this screensaver failed to mention the remarkable resources these paramedics provided to both white and Black residents of Pittsburgh. It also did not mention the racism that prompted Black communities in Pittsburgh to create the ambulance service initially, nor the racism that led to its decline. This Black-run service was shut down when Pittsburgh Mayor Peter Flaherty refused to renew the contract for medical care elsewhere in the city. In 1974, a citywide ambulance service staffed by non-police paramedics was announced and became the Pittsburgh Bureau of Emergency Medical Services. A year later, on October 15, 1975, the Freedom House ambulance service closed. By the late 1990s, 98% of PEM's personnel were white. While reading the best-selling book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, a white sociologist, I experienced an aha moment. This book helped me understand the meaning of implicit bias, a less obvious and more subtle form of racism. DiAngelo's examples of racism perpetuated by white America, told by a white woman, were clear and straightforward. A 2019 lecture by D'Angelo summed it up. She showed a slide with 3 white college students competing in a Champion Jeopardy playoff. All game categories had been answered and removed from the display. Yet one category was left untouched. It was African American history. All the questions in that category remained unanswered by the 3 white contestants. One picture speaks volumes. We do not know our history, D'Angelo said to the audience. The term Mississippi appendectomies highlights both racial bias and eugenics practices deeply rooted in the American healthcare system. These procedures involved involuntary sterilizations and hysterectomies performed by Southern medical students on white and black women from the 1920s to the 1980s. This history offers an important perspective on the medical and mental health treatment of people of color. These topics were never addressed during my college and medical training. Looking back, I realized I never had a person of color as a teacher or mentor in grammar school, high school, college, graduate school, or residency. I wonder what my fellow students of color thought of their school experiences. I never asked. Medical school was in Mexico, an experience I did not view as positive at the time. Over the years, that perspective has thankfully changed. To advance the gynecological medicine, Dr. Marion Sims, recognized as the father of gynecology in the mid-19th century, performed surgical procedures without anesthesia on enslaved black women. While practicing in New York, he founded the Women's Hospital, the first hospital in the United States dedicated to women's health. The foundation of gynecological medicine in the U.S. is rooted in the intentional suffering and pain inflicted upon black women with severe medical conditions by a white male doctor, and it was honored by his peers and community at the time. Eventually, Sims left the U.S. to offer his surgical skills and expertise to wealthy European women. In 2018, after years of community activism, his statue in New York Central Park was removed and relocated to his gravesite in Brooklyn. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from current issues of the Niagara Gazette. We read from the Niagara Gazette every Saturday at 11 a.m. Your reader has been Paul Denning. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Dunkirk Observer. Following that at 1 o'clock, we have a reading of some of our Northtown B papers, including Amherst, Clarence, Cheektowaga, Lancaster, and Depew. And then at 2 o'clock, we have the Southtown Bs, which includes Orchard Park, the Hamburg Sun, the East Aurora, and West Seneca papers. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Radio Reading broadcasts daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, and books to people who are blind or have a print disability and are provided reading radios. Radio Reading's broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. From broadcast studios at 1199 Harlem Road, Radio Reading continues our almost 40-year tradition of award-winning service. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555.
Thank you.
following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another